To make your seriously spooky chocolate cake, you will need 105 ml of vegetable oil, 175 grams of plain flour, half a teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda, 1.5 eggs, 120 ml of buttermilk, 185 grams of caster sugar, 32 grams of cocoa powder, some coffee, and a pinch of salt. For the buttercream, you'll need 340 grams of icing sugar, 150 grams of butter, and 2 tablespoons of milk. For the ganache strip, you will need 30 grams of cooking chocolate and 30 grams of double cream. I've made a separate video for the meringues, but you will need caster sugar and eggs. To start by preheating your oven to about 150 degrees. Put all of your dry ingredients into one mixing bowl. This includes your flour, your caster sugar, your cocoa powder, bicarbonate of soda, and a pinch of salt. Set your dry ingredients aside and in another bowl add your wet ingredients. Weigh your egg to figure out how much you'll need for 1.5 eggs. My whole egg weighed 47 grams, so I only added 24 grams of the other. Add in your vegetable oil, your buttercream, and 120 ml of coffee. Whisk the wet ingredients together and then add the dry ingredients to the wet ingredients to avoid lumps. Once nicely combined, grease 3 tins. For reference, these ones are about 5 inches. Pour your mixture into the tins and pop them into the oven for about 28 minutes or until they bounce back and the skewer comes out clean. Once they're done, leave them to cool and start your buttercream. Beat 150 grams of butter that should be about room temperature until it's really pale and super fluffy. Measure out 340 grams of icing sugar and add it to the butter in 2 halves. Cover your mixer with a tea towel to avoid an overspill of icing sugar. To loosen it up and make it more creamy, add 2 tablespoons of milk. Once the buttercream is finished, it should be thick enough that it doesn't fall off of the spatula. By now your sponges should have cooled down, so start to neatly trim the tops off of each sponge. Once they're all trimmed, begin to layer each of the sponges on top of each other, using the buttercream in between each layer. Apply a crumb coat to the whole sponge to avoid any loose crumbs going into the finish of the cake. Once that's done, pop it in the fridge for about half an hour or until it's firm to touch. Whilst that's setting, use some food colouring to play around with some decorations. I'm using sugar paste and a little bit of orange food colouring to make the cutest little pumpkins. Meringues also make a really cool topping, and you can find out how I made mine on my spooky Halloween meringue tutorial. For the ombre style buttercream finish, simply colour your buttercream into 3 colours. Mix them together and then apply them to a cake in stripes. At this point you don't need to be tidy with it because you're going to blend them all together anyway. Once you've applied the colours that you wanted to use a palette knife to go around and neatly blend them all in together. I added texture to the cake just by going around with the palette knife, but of course this is optional. Add any other finishes you want, such as glitter, and pop the cake into the fridge for a couple of minutes whilst you make the ganache. To make the ganache, simply measure some cream and measure the exact same weight in chocolate. Put it into the microwave for 15-second intervals to avoid the cream overheating, and then let it stand for about a minute to make sure the chocolate's fully melted. I've added black colouring, but of course that again is optional, and this is the really fun part. Start to pour your ganache on top of the cake and then spread it so that it drips just perfectly. Add your pumpkins and your meringues to the top, and there we have it, your super chocolatey, seriously spooky Halloween cake. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I'd love to know if you recreate this cake. Make sure you thumbs up, subscribe and comment below, and have a happy Halloween.